Problem 8A-3, Part 2, we're going to journalize the entries to record the employer's payroll tax expense for each period in the general journal. And they're reminding us here that the SUTA rate is 5.7%, FUTA rate is 0.6%. Record debits first, then credits. Exclude explanations from journal entries. Enter all amounts to the nearest cent. All right, so we're going to record the employer's payroll tax expense for October 31st. Remember, for this part here, it's employer, not employee. So let's quickly review the journal entries when recording payroll. So here's a screenshot of one of the PowerPoint slides. Notice this is journal entry 1. So a payroll journal entry 1 in which we're recording the salaries expense and the employee withholdings. This is for the employees, so we have the gross wages here and then all of their deductions. And you subtract those deductions from the gross pay, and that gives you net pay. But we're not going to record this transaction in this problem, and this problem they just want you to record the employer. So let's look at the employer journal entry, which is journal entry number 2. So let's look at the employer journal entry, which is journal entry number 2 when doing payroll. So for the employer payroll taxes, we're going to debit payroll tax expense, and then we're going to record the Social Security tax that the employer has to pay, the Medicare tax that the employer has to pay, and the FUTA and SUTA that the employer has to pay. Now this problem is emphasizing the 941, and do you remember what the 941 taxes are? They are FICA, FIT. So we've got Social Security, Medicare, and then federal income tax. So in this problem, we're going to ignore FUTA and SUTA because authors just wanted to make this problem easier for you. So when we do this transaction, we're going to skip FUTA and SUTA, but don't get confused and think, why are we not paying those? Because in the real world, we would pay those as well as the employers. So we're going to be debiting payroll tax expense and then crediting Social Security payable and Medicare payable. So let's first start by inputting payroll tax expense. Then we have Social Security payable and Medicare payable. So to find the amounts, we have to go back up here and open up our table. Notice it says we're doing October right now, so we have to open the October payroll table. So we have to look up here in October, and so for the Social Security, the employees paid was a total of $633.64. So we can go ahead and copy that over. Now remember, the employer has to match that. So since Social Security payable is increasing, remember payables increase with a credit. And then we also need the Medicare, which is also increasing with a credit here. So we can go ahead and paste that over. And then the debit for payroll tax expense is going to be just $633.64 plus $148.19 here to balance the transaction, which is going to be $781.83. We can go ahead and check our answer. Good job. And then we can go ahead and move on to November. So it's going to be essentially the same thing here. The payroll tax expense again, the Social Security payable, and the Medicare payable. But this time we're going to go ahead and close out October and move on to November's table here because we are recording here for November. So it looks like $662.16 was our Social Security. So we'll go ahead and credit that since we're increasing that Social Security payable. And then for the Medicare, we will do the same, increase that with a credit for $154.86. And then we can go ahead and add these credits together to balance the transaction here for $817.02. And then we can go ahead and check our answer. Okay, and then we can move on here to December's table here since we're doing the payroll tax here for December now. So again, our debit here will be payroll tax expense, credit to Social Security payable, credit to Medicare payable. And then for those amounts again here, Social Security paid by the employees is $567.30, so we can go ahead and copy that over. And then increase our Medicare here with a credit for $179.80. And to balance the transaction, the total expense here added together is $747.10. And we can go ahead and check that answer. Good job. Now it says Part 3. Journalize the payment of each tax liability in the general journal. Record debits first, then credits. Exclude explanations from journal entries. Enter all amounts to the nearest cent. First, journalize the payment of October's tax liability in the general journal. So now what taxes are they talking about? Remember, this is the Form 941, so the taxes involved are in a 941 are FICA, FICA FIT. And I say FICA twice because remember to remind you that the FICA for the employee and then there's FICA for the employer. And then FIT, so we need to pay the two FICA taxes. So for example, this payable here, the Social Security payable, in order to eliminate this payable, we need to decrease it. So in order to decrease the payable, in other words, liability, you debit it. So we're going to go ahead and debit Social Security payable here. Now that one is FICA and then Medicare payable also. So we're going to go ahead and debit Social Security payable. That's the first FICA. We're going to go ahead and debit FICA Medicare payable. That's the second one. And then the FIT payable. And then finally we will credit cash since we are paying those. And cash is decreasing. So now we need to figure out, well, how much is that amount? So we're going to be going back up here and we need to open up October because we are working on October's tax liability. So October's Social Security is $633.64, and that's what the employees paid. So now remember, Form 941, we paid FICA, FICA FIT. And again, I say FICA twice because we've got the employee portion of $633.64 plus the employer portion again of $633.64. So I'm going to have to double that. So we'll go ahead and pop open our calculator here and get $633.64, and then we can go ahead and multiply that by 2, and that's going to equal $1,267.28. And then we're going to go ahead and click into the cell and populate that here since we are lowering the Social Security payable for both employee and employer. So that will be with a debit since we are lowering that liability and paying it to the U.S. government. So now we need to do the same for the Medicare payable. We can go ahead and find that here, the $148.19. And again, that is the employee portion. So we will need to double that amount in order to get the employer portion in there as well. So that total is going to be $296.38, and that is going to be populated here into the debit since we are lowering that payable. And then we've got FIT, so federal income tax payable. So remember 941 taxes or FICA, FICA FIT, we only say FIT once because FIT is only paid by the employee. So I'm going to go ahead and check that out here in our table. It'll be $1,495. And then finally we're going to have our cash amount. So we're going to go ahead and add these up. $1,267.28, $296.38, and $14.95 for a total to balance our transaction of $3,058.66. So that's the amount of cash we are going to be paying out in order to remove these payables. So let's go ahead and check our answer here. Good job. And now we'll be doing the same thing here for November's tax liability. So we can go ahead and get rid of October's table and open up November's. So we're going to go ahead and pay the FICA Social Security payable. FICA Medicare payable, and these are both for employee and employer for this portion of the problem, and then FIT payable by the employee. And finally, to balance our transaction, we'll be paying cash to get rid of these payables. So go ahead and clear out your calculator. For Social Security payable here, we're going to take a look and see $662.16 was paid by the employee. And we're going to multiply that by 2 in order to get the employer portion. We can go ahead and populate that in as a debit in order to remove that payable and pay it. And then we're going to go ahead and clear out our calculator again, and this time for Medicare, we're going to go ahead and multiply $154.86 by 2 for a total of $309.72. Go ahead and click in the cell and populate that. And then finally, FIT payable, since we are only paying it again for the employee here, is $1,627. So you can either copy and paste or type that in. And then in order to balance our transaction here, we'll add these through and credit cash in order to pay that payable. So the total for that will be $3,261.04. And we'll go ahead and check our answer. Fantastic. Okay, and now we're moving on to the December tax liability. So let's go ahead and close out of the November payroll table. Clear our calculator too. Pull that up here. Put that up here. Excellent. So now we're going to go ahead and put in the FICA Social Security payable that we're going to be getting rid of, both employee and employer, then the Medicare, and federal income tax here, payable, and then our cash. So again, here we're going to take our Social Security of $567.30 and multiply that by 2 in order to get both the employee and employer portion. Because again, this is just the employee portion. And we'll go ahead and populate that in here as a debit in order to decrease the payable. And then we'll go ahead and clear our calculator and get our Medicare payable of $179.80, and we will multiply that by 2 to get both employee and employer portion. And then we'll go ahead and populate that into the cell. And federal income tax payable just for the employee again, so that's that $2,044 even here. So we'll go ahead and debit that. And then we will go ahead and clear our calculator and add these through. For a total of $3,538.20. Let's go ahead and check our answer. Nice work. All right, now this says journalize the FUTA and SUTA payment. Note that any SUTA taxes would likely have been paid earlier in the year, but for purposes of this problem, assume that the FUTA and SUTA taxes for the first 3 quarters of the current year have been accrued in the appropriate quarters and are being paid in January of the following year. So now in January, we're going to go ahead and we will lower our FUTA payable and our SUTA tax payable. And then we're going to go ahead and balance that and pay them with cash. And then why will we be debiting our FUTA and SUTA payable? Because remember, it says assume the FUTA and SUTA taxes for the first 3 quarters have been accrued. In other words, those liabilities have been increased, and so since we are now going to be paying them, we have to debit them in order to decrease them. Okay, so now let's go ahead and check out our end of the year information and see if this problem is being kind to us here. It looks like they do not have a SUTA and FUTA taxable column. So again, that would make things much easier for us, which would be nice, but let's go ahead and review here in our tasks. So it looks like the SUTA rate here is 5.7%, the FUTA rate is 0.6%, and for each of those, it's on the first $7,000 of earnings. And that is per employee. So let's go ahead and see if everybody made over 7,000 that year. It does appear here in December, so that year to date, year end earnings here, everybody has made over $7,000. So then we can go ahead and pop open our calculator here to see what that taxable wage base is going to be for the total. So that's going to be 7,000 for each of these employees. So we'll multiply that by 3 since we have 3 employees here for 21,000, and then we'll go ahead and grab that rate again. For this, looks like we're doing our FUTA here first, so 0.6%. We'll go ahead and clear that out. 21,000 multiplied by 0.6, and then our percent key for $126 even, and we're going to debit that since we are paying it, which decreases that payable. And then we can go ahead, and since that wage base here for all 3 together is 21,000, we can go ahead and enter that in and multiply that by the 5.7%. And that's going to be 1,197. So go ahead and click in the cell to debit that payable so we can pay it. And then to balance that transaction, we'll see how much cash we need to pay in order to get those payables out of there. And that's going to be a total of 1,323. And you can go ahead and click in the cell and populate that for cash. And we are crediting cash because we are decreasing cash in order to pay these payables here from the end of the year. Go ahead and check our answer. Excellent. Okay, and then in the next video here for part 4, we're going to complete Form 941 for the 4th quarter of the current year.